It's a problem versus it could be worse. It's a problem. What's usually considered a major problem in a relationship generally includes any form of abuse, addiction, adultery, or treating the other partner with a lack of dignity or respect. Abusive behavior tends to start off as a series of small boundary pushes or comes across as insensitive, rude, or questionable behavior cloaked in a you're the one with the problem kind of way. If the target stays, then odds are the abusive, aka problematic, behavior starts becoming more and more frequent. But since the abusive person continually denies, minimizes, or justifies their behavior, the target is left to wonder if perhaps they really are too sensitive, too emotional, can't take a joke, or are otherwise to blame. In this way, problematic behavior becomes their new normal. It's very common for people who are in these dynamics to realize that things are a problem, but not identify what they are experiencing is as big a problem as it really is, even if there is abuse involved. This is because abusive behavior is confusing behavior. When a person starts to experience the cruel Mr. Hyde side of their partner, they often try to understand why they're acting like this. And if their partner is blaming their lashing out on them or on stress, work, the kids, you name it, then in an attempt to get the Dr. Jekyll back, they start walking on eggshells, thinking that if they can just resolve the stress or be a better partner, then this will keep their partner faithful or friendly. For those who have been in abusive relationships, they know that there aren't enough eggshells in the world to walk on in order to change their partner into being someone who respects them or their relationship. So while they might view their relationship as having problems, it often takes years, or someone else pointing it out, before they view it as abusive. Another reason people have a hard time sorting out the difference between a problematic relationship and an abusive relationship is because everyone has their own preconceived idea of what an abusive relationship is, as well as their baseline for, and also has their baseline for what is normal, acceptable, or workable, which is in large part defined by what they've seen in movies, experienced growing up, and what they've experienced from partners in the past. For example, if a person grew up in a home where they were beaten, they might not view their current partner's behavior as problematic since they aren't being hit and have experienced much worse physical abuse in the past, even though they are being yelled at, ground down, or continually cheated on. It could be worse. It's very common for people to try to minimize their partner's problematic behavior, especially if they want to stay in the relationship. One way that people tend to rationalize what they're experiencing is by telling themselves that things could always be worse. Well, it might be true that things could always be worse. It doesn't mean that things aren't a problem, or that they aren't worthy of being a deal breaker. And if our gauge for what's a problem is that things could always be worse, well then, things could and will get worse until they can no longer handle how bad things have become. The "it could be worse" justification is used by people in all kinds of problematic situations. Some examples are, he made some weird comments about how attractive the waitress was and how he was so glad he could check out other women without me getting jealous, because he's a guy and that's just what guys do. I mean, I guess it could be worse. At least he's not flirting with the waitress or cheating on me. She racked up about $1,000 of credit card debt without me knowing, but it could be worse. I mean, it could have been $5,000. Well, yeah, he yells a lot, but it could be worse. I mean, he's never yelled at me in front of the kids. She called me some names, but she only yells at me like that. She called me some names, but she only yells at me like that, but it could be worse. I mean, at least she doesn't give me the silent treatment like my mom used to do. He yells at me and the kids, but it could be worse. I mean, at least he doesn't hit us. Yes, she hits us, but it's not that often, and it could be worse. I mean, she could hit us every day. He's hit me a few times, but it was never in my face. It could be worse. At least it didn't leave a bruise or anything. She hit me in the face, and it left a bruise, but it's not that big. It could be worse. At least I can cover it with makeup. It's just how we fight. He beat me up, but he didn't break any bones or anything. It could be worse. My ex, or my father or mother, beat me and my sister up worse. She broke one of my ribs and fractured my arm, but it's not that bad. I was only in the hospital for a few hours. Just because something could be worse, and the person can still tolerate what they are being put through, doesn't mean that it's not a problem. Any form of abusive behavior is a problem, and all forms of abuse are traumatic and can be equally damaging. It's damaging to the person going through it, and it's damaging to the children who are watching it happen or who are experiencing it themselves. New story. My ex-boyfriend was incredibly abusive, and although I didn't realize it until recently, that relationship was the one that I compared all my other relationships to. If I was treated abusively, I'd think to myself, well, it could be worse. It's nothing compared to how John treated me. I realize now that abuse is abuse, and that using how John treated me as a measuring stick for what was okay or not okay was a mistake. I had to work a lot on my self-esteem to realize that I was worthy of being treated with dignity and respect, and that settling for anything less would never be okay. Cheryl. An attitude of scarcity versus an attitude of abundance. An attitude of scarcity. It's very common for former targets of narcissistic abuse to have their world flipped upside down after being used, abused, or exploited. Perhaps one of the largest struggles that a survivor has is with trust. They often have a hard time trusting others, as well as their perception of events and their own instincts about people and situations. This leaves a person feeling very disoriented, fearful, anxious, and wanting to isolate. These feelings of distrust are often due to gaslighting, which is a form of psychological abuse where one person, the gaslighter, denies or distorts their target's reality into what they want, either because they don't want the truth to be acknowledged or because they are sadistic and enjoy eroding another person's sanity. Most people who experience gaslighting don't often realize what is going on, or often don't realize what is going on, and start to feel like they are losing their mind. Once they come across this term, they are often relieved that they are not crazy, and often become outraged at how another person could do this to them. The after effects of gaslighting tend to be long-lasting, as when a person's sense of reality has been altered, it takes a while to get back. In addition, because other people who have never experienced gaslighting are often full of well-intended bad advice and are quick to dismiss their concerns or want to push them back out into interacting with people, telling them they just need to get back out there again and not let what happened to them rule their life. A large part of what's really going on is that a person who has gone through gaslighting and abuse of any kind is usually a lot more aware of what abusive behavior is, and they are picking up on things that a person who has never gone through something like this has. Usually this picking up of subtle cues and mannerisms of abuse happens on a subconscious level, and can, and often does, start to register with a person through feelings that something is off. Feelings of confusion, anxiety, nightmares, or a tightness in their chest when they're experiencing it. What I see often, and personally experienced, is that this person who is feeling lonely and damaged is seeking to heal those wounds through dating/finding love, instead of spending time with friends, cultivating their support system, and developing hobbies. So they start dating again, get caught up with someone who starts giving them a lot of attention, and are quick to start talking or texting with this person for hours every day. When red flags start to surface, they often feel confusion, which, if that feeling grows, leads to mental anguish. During this time, they are often told by friends, family, and maybe even their therapist that they are pushing away love because they are afraid of being hurt or that they are being too picky. Because they are lonely, have a fear of being alone, or are looking for a friend in a person they are dating, they have a subconscious attitude of scarcity when it comes to other people, which is driving them to make problematic relationships work. They may also be concerned with a fear of missing out on a great person because they have issues with trust, and so they stuff their concerns down deep and keep moving forward in this relationship, and they usually stay in it until their original concerns are proven right. And many times a person goes from abusive relationship to abusive relationship because they get caught up in the intensity and the resulting whirlwind that these relationships form. When the relationship ends, they don't know why this keeps happening to them or how to break this cycle, and they often start feeling cursed, or like all men or women, are abusive, and so they swear off dating. An attitude of abundance. A person with an attitude of abundance realizes that there are lots of people in the world, and they aren't worried about missing out on a good one. They realize that if a person has problematic or squirrely behavior, then they aren't missing out on anything if they let them go, because there is nothing solid there to begin with. It's a lot easier to have an attitude of abundance and to leave problematic situations if we have something else to fall back on. This is why having a solid support system in place is so important. For example, it's a lot easier to leave an awful job if we have another job offer waiting for us, or if we have some savings set aside. It's a lot easier to leave a problematic relationship during the first few weeks if we make sure to continue spending time with friends and with our hobbies. It's a lot harder if we have nothing fun or exciting going on in our life, and talking to that new person is the only way we know how to make ourselves feel loved or important. New story. When I met Bob, I started having nightmares about my abusive ex. I thought it was because I was dating again and had a bunch of unresolved issues. He seemed so into me right off the bat and was in hot pursuit. We were talking for hours every day, and even though my gut instinct was telling me that things were moving too fast, I didn't want to slow things down and risk losing him because I had concerns. After all, he seemed like such an amazing guy, and he was so different from my ex. Whenever I brought up my concerns to my friends and therapist, they'd offer up excuses for all his behavior, and kept telling me that I needed to let my guard down, or I was going to miss out on a good guy. I dated Bob for close to a year, and he was an amazing boyfriend, until I found out he was married, and had been married for 10 years. I'm not mad at my friends or therapists for pushing me into dating him. I'm more mad at myself for not trusting my gut instinct about him. I will never go against my gut instincts again. If something feels off, it's because it is off. The right people and situations don't make me feel like an anxious, confused mess. And if the person is right, I know now that I will slow things down. And if they aren't comfortable at the pace I want to move, then they aren't right for me. Jill. Who society tends to think can be abusive versus the types of people who are abusive. Who society tends to think can be abusive. Society tends to think that women, especially mothers, are not or cannot be abusive, and that men are the abusive ones. In order to back this up, they will point to the statistics collected, which show that 85% of domestic violence cases are with a male abuser and a female target. So it makes sense that people would think that, based on this information, men are abusive when these are the statistics floating around out there. The truth is that abuse is not about gender, it's about behavior. Women can be, and many are, just as abusive. Now, don't get me wrong. Violence against women is a very real problem, and there does need to be education out there. However, the unintended consequence of only focusing on female victims of abuse is that this only addresses half of the issue. In addition, by not discussing what men and boys go through, they are much less likely to identify that they are being abused, and so they are much less likely to seek help. When the issue of abuse is addressed as mainly a female issue, many men often struggle with shame, embarrassment, and feeling emasculated because they are being abused by a woman. Any type of person can have abusive behavior. They can be male or female, young or old. They can be a parent, a child, a sibling, a significant other, a friend. They can be any nationality, any religion, any sexual orientation, any education level, any profession, any income level, you name it. New story. I was in a friendship for many years with a woman who was jealous, controlling, paranoid, possessive, and hypocritical. She would demand to know who I was out with, where I was, and so on. When she got her way, and when she was in a good mood, she was fun to be around. But when she wasn't getting enough attention, or things weren't going her way, she was awful. It was like dealing with a bratty child in an adult body. I used to joke with people that I felt like I was in an abusive relationship. I had always thought of an abusive relationship as something between two people that were dating or married. It took me many years to realize that I was, and that friends could be abusive too. Lisa. News story. My mother was, and still is, incredibly abusive, but my father and everyone else blamed her childhood and blamed us for not being more understanding and sympathetic towards her. She used to yell at and beat us kids like you couldn't imagine. She was horrible. But out in public, she volunteered for all kinds of things and seemed like a caring mother. I don't think anyone realized we were being abused, in part because no one thinks a woman or a mother would act like how she did. George. Who society thinks can be a target of abuse versus who is a target of abuse. By and large, a society as a whole tends to think of abuse as a women's issue, and that men, specifically husbands or boyfriends, are the ones who abuse them. However, according to the National Coalition of Domestic Violence, 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime, and for men that number is 1 in 4, and that's only what's reported. Frankly, my guess is that number is much higher for men, but because there is very little information out there that speaks directly to what men go through, not nearly as many are able to identify what they went through as abuse. When I first started my YouTube channel, I only spoke about the female experience as far as abuse goes, from what I had experienced as well as what I had been trained in when I was working at a domestic violence shelter. A few months into making videos, I began to receive messages from both men, straight and gay women who were seeking clarity as to their experiences. It was at that point that I realized with a great deal of sadness that there really was a huge gap in education and awareness when it came to identifying what abuse behavior looked like if it was outside the traditionally understood and stereotypical male-female dynamic, and that I'd been unintentionally contributing to minimizing them and their experiences. Like with anything else in life, once we know better, then we can start to do better. It's so critical that as a society we understand what all forms of abuse behavior look like, as well as understand that anyone can have abusive behavior, if we ever want to raise true awareness and develop successful prevention and treatment. Because the full picture is that anyone can be a target of abuse. Abuse can and does happen to people regardless of gender, age, size, strength, nationality, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, religion, profession, you name it. Abuse isn't about gender, it's about power and control. News story. I was doing an externship abroad for my PhD program. The professor I was working with was very esteemed in his field and brought in a lot of grant money for the university. At first he was friendly, and I enjoyed working with him. And then one day it was like a switch flipped, and he became sexually inappropriate and verbally abusive with me. I was terrified and felt like if I didn't give in to his sexual demands that I wouldn't be able to complete my PhD program. I was stuck overseas and couldn't easily leave. I endured his abuse for 6 weeks until I left. The whole experience has left me traumatized, and when I returned and told the university, they basically told me that he'd had many complaints before, but that he was an esteemed professor. They shrugged it off. I was in therapy for a while after this, and that's where I learned that I had PTSD, and that what I had experienced was abusive. Susan. What people tend to think is at the core of abusive behavior versus what is actually at the core of abusive behavior. Most people tend to think that anger issues, poor coping methods, ineffective communication, addiction, or stress are at the core of abusive behavior. While many of these behaviors and issues go hand in hand with abusive behavior, they are not the root cause of it. The core of abusive behavior is the desire to get and keep power and control over others and over situations, and this need for power and control comes out in 7 main ways: verbal, emotional, psychological, financial, sexual, spiritual, and/or physical. When abuse is present, it is very rare that it's only one type of abuse. Narcissistic people are driven by a staggering degree of both selfishness and entitlement. It's all about them and what they want all of the time, and they go about getting what they want by using power and control, the use of control being perhaps more easily identifiable. They get control over others in ways that are physical, such as isolating their target by moving them away from friends and family, or by limiting their access to a vehicle. They may isolate them in emotional ways, such as through love bombing, in which they are spending hours and hours every day communicating with their target. This is most commonly associated with online dating scammers and cults, but it happens within other dynamics with a narcissistic person. They may attempt to control their target emotionally through creating or recreating a soulmate type of connection, where they are charming, attentive, affectionate, oftentimes the perfect partner in bed, and exploit their partner's optimism and hope by offering up promises of change. They may attempt to control their target spiritually by using guilt, obligation, and their faith to control their behavior. They may control their target financially by driving them into debt, forcing them to work several jobs and then turning over all their money, or forcing them to not work at all. They may control them sexually by using guilt, obligation, shame, and embarrassment to use, abuse, molest, or rape them. They may control them psychologically by use of gaslighting, lying, and manipulation to control their target's perception of reality and what they're up to. They may control their target verbally and emotionally by a series of subtle put-downs, mean sarcasm, cruel teasing, bullying, and overall grinding down a person's self-esteem to where they think the narcissistic person is the best they can do. And the abuse is either not happening, usually telling the target, "You are making a big deal out of nothing," or it's the target's fault, such as, "You are too sensitive, too emotional, can't take a joke, don't clearly communicate. That's what happens when you talk about our business to other people, or your friends or family are the problem." All of these excuses and manipulations can really simultaneously grind a person down as well as groom them to start walking on eggshells, doubling up their efforts at being a better partner in order to earn their partner's love or loyalty, or both. When one person is driven by power and control, this is an individual issue. This is not a relationship issue, because they bring that mindset with them everywhere they go. And because it's an individual issue, this is one of the main reasons therapy often makes narcissistic people worse and not better, especially couples counseling, because you have one person, the partner, who is making themselves even more vulnerable by having open, honest, sincere, solutions-oriented communication, and the controlling partner who is gaining information about all their concerns, fears, and insecurities, which will be used against their partner later on, even if they are saying everything they need to say in therapy to charm both their therapist and their partner. Make no mistake, narcissistic people don't play fair. They play to win at whatever cost. The cost of their marriage, their relationship with their children, their job, you name it. And they will destroy everything if that's what it means to them to win. New story. I thought his abuse and cheating was due to anger, or alcohol, or my appearance, and so I went to great lengths to not make him angry, but nothing I did was ever enough. He needed to control every little thing, and lied and manipulated to do so. Trying to make our relationship work and keep him happy was like trying to hit a moving target. Just when I thought I was able to keep the peace, I'd either find out about more cheating, or drinking, or debt he'd racked up, or he'd start yelling or putting me down about something else. Linda. A normal relationship versus an abusive relationship. A normal relationship is one that is built on the foundation of mutual trust and support, in which both people treat each other with dignity and respect. Their communication is open, honest, sincere, and solutions-oriented. A normal relationship has issues, but not to the point where it becomes a one-sided relationship, to where one person's behavior is dragging the other through hell. It's very common for people who are either in an abusive relationship or who have been in a series of abusive relationships, oftentimes starting with abuse or neglect as a child, to struggle with defining what a normal relationship is, what healthy boundaries are, what workable behavior is, and that there need to be deal breakers. This is because when a person has been around dysfunction for so long, it becomes their normal. So if we want our lives to change, we have to get a healthier idea of what normal is. And everyone's idea of what is healthy or normal as well as what deal breakers are for them, is different. The best way for you to get that clarity is to turn inward and do some soul searching for what you want your life to look like and what you want your life to feel like, and then to base your decisions on bridging the gap between where you are and where you want to be. What's helped me the most has been to get clear and honest with myself about what drains my energy and what gives me energy, and to do more of the things and be around the people that empower and excite me, and to do less of the things or be around people who drain my energy. The most important difference between a normal relationship and an abusive relationship is that an abusive relationship is a one-sided relationship where one person has all, or the majority, of the power and control and is focused on what they want, especially when the other partner isn't looking, and feels entitled and justified in treating others, their partner, and their relationship however they want. And generally, the other one is either scared to leave, focused on keeping the relationship together at all costs, or is forever trying to figure out how to fix their partner's behavior. An abusive person goes about gaining that power and control through a series of boundary pushes, manipulation, emotional highs and lows, physical and or emotional isolation, financial dependency, and lies. When done steadily over time, this subtle mistreatment becomes seen as normal. The person in this dynamic most likely does not even realize that they are in an abusive relationship. They tend to realize that something is off, which often registers as perpetual confusion about their partner's behavior, their relationship, and if they are the problem. It is critical for those who are trying to help someone who is in an abusive relationship dynamic to realize that they aren't simply in a bad relationship, and that there are not two equally valid sides to the story. They are in a hostage situation, and most likely don't even realize it. Just as many cult members tend to not realize that they are in a cult until things get so dangerous and destructive that they realize they need to get out of there. And leaving either situation is rarely easy. It's more along the lines of escaping. There is perhaps no greater damage that can be done to a person than when they go to a therapist, and that therapist doesn't identify that they are in an abusive relationship, and instead treats the situation as though the issues are relationship issues instead of an individual issue, or that the dynamic is a dysfunctional relationship instead of an abusive relationship. This would be like a cult member finally getting to the point where they work up the courage to talk to an outsider about what's going on, and then being told that they either need to just leave or that their issue is a relationship issue with the cult leader, and that they just need to go back and keep working on things. If there is a dynamic where one person is continually using manipulation and deceit to physically or emotionally hold someone hostage, either physically, emotionally, or mentally, so that they can't get what they want, then it's an abusive dynamic. It doesn't matter where that dynamic is found, it's still a big and very real problem, regardless if the dynamic is between a religious cult/cult leader, a hostage terrorist situation, a partner/abusive partner relationship, a child/abusive parent relationship, manipulated masses/megalomaniac political leader, the Hitlers of the world, you name it. It's important that we see abusive dynamics at play when they are happening, and not have our thinking about what we consider abusive or problematic become totally derailed because this person is a family member. News story. I grew up with parents who were abusive and neglectful. My brothers and I were continually yelled at, put down, or ignored growing up. When I began dating, I was so desperate to be loved, but didn't realize it. I dated all the wrong people and wound up marrying a man who treated me a lot like my parents did. I think I stayed in that marriage for as long as I did because how I was treated was on many levels normal, and I didn't realize that there was a problem or that I should leave. My ex-husband was the one who ended up leaving me, and even though I was miserable being married, I was terrified at being alone. But actually, him leaving me was really a blessing because all that pain that I felt when that relationship ended helped me to discover that my boundaries, standards, and self-love really needed work. Now my new level of normal is much healthier. I am no longer starved out for love or validation from a man or from anyone, really, and I for sure don't tolerate being abused by anyone. Katie. News story. Every relationship I've ever been in has been very different. Some were abusive and some were great. I didn't stay in the abusive relationships because I felt they were normal. I knew what I was experiencing wasn't normal, but I thought it was still workable. With all the abuse I endured, I was led to believe that it was either not happening, not that big of a deal, or somehow my fault. I guess what I'm saying is that I didn't realize I was being abused when it was happening. I always thought that commitment was forever, and that people should always try and work through everything. My parents had a great relationship and were married for close to 50 years before my dad died. I wanted to stay married too, and felt like if I left, it meant I was a failure. What was normal for me was to stay married no matter what. I now realize that's where I was going wrong. I had no deal breakers and thought I just needed to work harder on the relationship, and that eventually he would change, and he did change. He got worse. It took me 30 years, but I finally left, and it breaks my heart to think I stayed for as long as I did, and that I ever thought it was okay to be treated so horribly. Rachel.